You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review, and my name is Lou Rosenfeld. I'm very happy you're here, and I'm very happy our guest today is here, Lisanne Norman, co-director of DEI at the Hotchkiss School in Connecticut, and a former UX researcher, user researcher. I guess I don't want to open up a can of worms right out of the gate. So we can come back to what would be the preferred term, Lisanne? What did you used to do? Would you say it was UX research or user research, or is it all the same?
All the same to me. UX research is what we used to call it.
Yeah, well, and you left it, which is
did.
really interesting because you were doing some research in some pretty high-profile places like Visa and Dell Computer, or Dell Technologies, I guess is technically the correct name of that organization. Before we get into that journey, I do want to mention to our listeners that Lisanne is speaking at Advancing Research 2023, which is taking place March 27th through 29th virtually. It's coming up fast. And Lisanne's talk is called Why I Left Research. So let's start with why you got into research.
Okay, that's a good one. It actually happened quite by accident. Truthfully speaking, I'd moved to Austin, Texas, and thought that I would be doing some adjunct teaching. That didn't quite work out at UT Austin. And I'd done part of my degree in social anthropology, right? So I'm an ethnographer as well as an anthropologist. And a friend of mine who also graduated from there, she goes, hey, you know what? You're in Austin, Texas. That's like the new tech hub. Do you know that tech companies pay people with social science degrees a lot of money to talk to people? And I said, stop it. That's silly. Literally, that was my first reaction. I was like, what do you mean?
Get paid for that.
You get paid for that, right? And so I was like, tell me more. And she told, a little bit. And so I did a search for some companies in Austin, found this great company, Cynthia Research. And I was like, I know how to conduct interviews, talk to people, analyze it, look for themes, patterns, and then sort of tell you, do an analysis and let you know like what I found. These are my skills. This is what I have. And they were like, great, come and do this. We have this project for Dell. Come on in and take over. Here's your 7-person research team. Go. And I was like, wait, what? They were like, you know what? You can do this. We'll help you. And it was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. I had to learn I'd never written a survey in my life. I had to learn how to write a survey. I had to learn how to give a survey, analyze a survey. I learned about, how to use Zoom. I didn't know what Zoom was, right? I had to sort of think about how to put together PowerPoint presentations, but in a short, pithy way that would be understandable for the executives at Dell that we were doing this research for. And it was, I loved it. I loved, having the team work together, doing some graphic design, learning how to, because we did everything. We did a customer journey, right? Dell wanted to understand what is every possible touch point from the time someone thinks about buying a personal computer until they've incorporated it into their lives for a year, right? So they really wanted this sort of really long-term study, which was a really good entrance for me, right, as an anthropologist into doing sort of UX research. But then sort of learning, how to do diary studies along the way, like all these different modes of research that I hadn't thought of, didn't even know existed. And so it was actually really fabulous and challenging and wonderful. And I just kind of didn't look back for the next 6 years.
So you were getting paid not just to talk with people, but to learn all kinds of new tools for doing just that.
Yeah. And that was that. I was like, this is incredible. I was like, you're helping me like increase my toolkit and you're paying me to do this, on the fly with a great team that we started learning how, like sharing, skill sharing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's something too that, in order to do more stronger team building. And it was just, it was wonderful, honestly. Like I said, it's the best job that I've had in a really long time.
So you're really happy, and you're hanging out in Austin. And how long were you in the role with Dell?
With the consulting firm Cynthia Research
Oh.
for a year, but then because I'd done research for Dell, when the time came for sort of, I wanted to try something new, more challenging. I reached out to the woman at Dell that I'd done the research for, the VP. She was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, all of this stuff about our website, about like the different pages, about our ordering portal. Why don't you come work at Dell?" And I was like, "Okay, like, all right, let's do this. Sure." And that was great because then I was on the other side, right? So now I'm at Dell, a part of their design team, working like directly on teams with designers, with PMs, and actually just working in tandem and with each other and starting to learn how to do like, like write testing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
doing more iterative, like on the spot work. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like this is very different than being on the agency side, right? So then I got once again, like expanding my knowledge, expanding the toolkit, and understanding sort of like what it, from the concept of a product to then actually seeing it ship. Like I didn't know what that was. Somebody's like, "Yeah, we've got to ship." I was like, "Ship what?" Like we're not we're not know what you're talking about, right? So learning this lingo, really getting to understand more and more what designers do, what tools they use. Because before I just been sort of coming up with the thing, sending it over and being like, okay, keep it moving. But now actually it's like being a part of that process and seeing something all the way through. And then seeing at such a large place, like Dell is humongous,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like and very siloed. And then, and it was just around the time that they had acquired EMC. And so they were like, wait, we might need to redesign our whole entire website. Can you come and be a part of that? And I was like, okay, like so then, right, even bigger team. And that was a really interesting project. And to work with different facets like marketing, to sort of understand like how do we retool this website
Mm-hmm.
and make it something that's accessible for B2C, B2B, like or they were like, or do we just need to separate it out completely? Right. So it was just to talk that through and then talk to folks to find out, well, what do you want? What do you look for when you come to this website? What do you need? Yeah, that was a super interesting project. And that project went on for a while. And then while I was at Dell, Visa came knocking on
Mm.
my door with another opportunity to be a part of a team building from the ground up, to look at helping them rethink and redesign the internal tools
Mm-hmm.
that Visa employees were using. So I was like, oh, that sounds like another challenge. Let's talk.
Wow. So you're like, all right. So you start in this agency, and you're getting paid to learn, and then Dell peels you away, and you're like taking that knowledge you had working with them as a consultant. You're now at Dell. You're getting to understand what makes designers tick, but also marketing people and product people, maybe developers. You're doing a bunch of information architecture, if I may say.
Yep.
And It sounds really fascinating. And then you get recruited to go to Visa and work on internal tools and a whole bunch of interesting challenges there, I imagine.
Yes, that was extremely interesting because although they had a design department, right? Like they had a whole like design, no one really worked with the internal tools.
Hmm.
Like these tools were, you looked at some of them, literally the parts of it they were using, like it looked like something out of the 1980s. I was like, this is like, I was like, how do you expect people to be efficient?
They have
You know,
to. They have to use
right?
it.
They have to use it. They can do it, right? And it was like something like it was taking someone like 13 different applications to help somebody, like get a new car or something. It
Hmm.
was just crazy. So it was, for the first time, these engineers and developers were having to interface now with somebody who's talking about, well, design? Like, did you think about like the, user friendly, like user focus? And they were like, what are you talking about right now? Like, we've been doing it fine. Just can't you just tell us to fine tune this, and then that's it? Like, this should take like two. It was just really, so now it was time to like evangelize, honestly, like that. It became, now I'm in a place where, in dealing with a particular part of the company that had never thought about the tools they were creating in that way. So it was a lot of like roadshow. Like, we literally created a UX roadshow to talk about how much money and time would be saved, right? Like, ROI of UX research. This is why you do it. And that was really interesting, because at that time, Visa was really, had been this traditional financial company that was really trying to shift and turn themselves into more of a fintech company, and to, and thinking about like, what did that mean? While in Austin, that made sense, right? Because that's what Austin's about. They bought this great new, but the majority of the company resides in Foster, California, where most of them, that was the experience that they had. So it was a really interesting meeting of those two, and that crossroad where Visa was really sort of taking that leap and really trying to embrace that. And then folks who were resistant to it, but then a lot who were slowly becoming open to it once they, spoke to us, and we sort of could show them like, hey, this would be a benefit, right? Like, doing these like design thinking and like co-working workshops with developers, with the marketing person, like with like all of us in a room being like, okay, like, we all have input and see it from this different way, but like, what ideas do we have? What ways do we think that we could take these 13 apps and put them into like 3? Like, that is the challenge. Let's do this. So that was, again, totally different work, right? Like, I'd never done that, and I was like, all right, let's do this. And again, it was exciting, and I was learning and growing, and the team was learning and growing. I was on a team with somebody who did change management, which I had no idea about, right? And then which was awesome, because then it was like, okay, so we're going to change this thing. How are we going to get people to adopt it? How are we going to get people to transition and get used to it, right? And so that also, just learning that and trying to think about that too, like kind of keeping that in the back of my mind as I was thinking about the research that we need to do to come up with.
Well, so, if you're listening to this podcast, you can, I'm sure you can tell there's a lot of enthusiasm in our guest's voice. Lisanne, I'm seeing you, I can see you, and you're smiling and you're gesturing with your hands and talking about all these wonderful things that you experienced in your work as a researcher. And yet your talk at Advancing Research 2023 is why I left research. I almost feel bad making that into a question, but so what happened?
In the midst of all of this learning and growing and move, was still a lot of microaggressions, right? Was still a lot of times when having to point out, have we thought about all the users? Have we thought about who might be the most marginalized of users for this product? And having people look at me like I was crazy. Like, have we thought about, because, again, like, if we design for the most marginalized, everybody benefits. And they're like, we don't have that sounds like that's going to take a lot of time. We don't have time for that. So just that's, but having to sort of point out like where that can go wrong, right? Like, talking about products that haven't done that, so people are left out and then harmed. And then also to people, honestly, ignoring suggestions that I've made. And then if, a white male coworker made the same suggestion, being like, oh, let's consider that. And literally sitting at a meeting thinking that I'm crazy because I just said that. And then when pointing that out to people, having people be like, oh, I didn't hear that. And I was like, but we were all just in the same room, right? And so then I found myself in this position where I was like taking the craziest notes, like the most like, this is what was said by this person, this is what was said by this person, in order to then be like, wait, but like, remember, I'm taking these notes, like, here, let me show you what, and people being like, oh, people assume coming into a room, I was a director at Visa.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a number of junior colleagues that were white and a little older than me. And, people coming into a room and assuming that my colleague who was junior to me was the director and the person coming in to talk about, right? Because, I didn't have my picture up anywhere. We were just meeting for the first time. And that, and sort of also just that, like that continually. And then then leaving sort of Visa to be like, okay, you know what, I'm tired of struggling to advance this, UX research in this particular department, as well as, sort of, it was just a more traditional company, and thinking, okay, and dealing with the level sort of, some of the sexism, some of the racism, the bias, like, hey, I'm going to, now switch to this new, young, hip happening e-commerce platform in Austin. And, thinking like, oh, it's young and it's infancy, it's going to grow. I'll be able to have influence and we'll be hiring like a diverse group of folks. And come to find out, absolutely not. I started working at this e-commerce platform and I was the only Black person when I started. And I was like, okay, well, this is, we're going to grow like rapidly, and then 3 months later, we were at like 200 and I was still the only Black person.
Oh my.
And I was like, okay, this is hard to come into an office every day and to not see anyone that looks like you, to, sort of to ask, what are we doing about recruiting for diversity? And I fell prey to this. They were like, well, can you help us? And I initially did. I sort of put together this presentation, was like, okay, there are these places to network. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is not my job. I'm not a recruiter. You didn't bring me here. This is someone else's job.
Right.
And so falling into that, that I've, again, talking to other women of color, and like that ends up happening. Now all of a sudden now there's this other job that you have because you brought this up and pointed this out. And sort of starting to push back at that, I found, I was like, okay, well, I'd like to be included on interviews, and then only finding myself included on interviews when the candidate was Black. And I was like, this is strange. I was like, and then pointing it out and being like, does nobody notice this? Sort of, can we all sort of take note of people like, oh yeah, no, we want to have this really diverse company, but we can't find people. Right. It's really hard. It's Austin. And I was like, it's actually not. I actually know a lot of diverse people in Austin, particularly who move here to work in tech. It's just, are you reaching out? Like, how are you going about? Are you holding fairs? Are you like, holding like an open, like there were just so many things that they could have been doing, and continually sort of, confronting this, sort of talking about, particularly too in the research, being like having to fight to be like, okay, we're creating this e-commerce product, that a platform that everyone is going to use. So we have to make sure that the participants that we recruit are diverse, right? And having to struggle with that. And then again, we hire a recruiting company. I have to tell the recruiting company, like, here are these other places you should be looking. Here, how about
you're doing their job for them?
Exactly. And I was like, so I'm doing my job, which is to come up with the research plan, to come up, and your job. And I refuse to let it go, because I was like, no, there's no way that you telling me that we're in Texas and we can't find a diverse group of participants to, for this, that's impossible. We're going to work it out. So it was, again, just that it became very draining, honestly.
Well, the way you were describing it a moment ago, maybe when you were still at Visa and you were taking all these notes, I envision you like having this weight that you're dragging when everyone else is unencumbered. Like you've got this cognitive weight that's like getting in the way of you doing your work, because you're like, I have to do my work and I have to like keep an eye on what the hell is going on around here and document things that nobody else has to think about.
Yeah. And it is that, right? And it's that sort of extra burden that people don't talk about and that nobody is aware of. And I think we're starting to talk about it more, but it was it was literally weighing me down, particularly when I got to the e-commerce startup in Austin. It was literally weighing me down. I met some friends that I hadn't seen in a while, and I got them. They were like, "Are you okay? Like, you don't look okay." I had people, I had a friend showing up at my house. She knows I love wine. And she was a young colleague that I'd mentored, and that, like, had ended up, helping her, work at Visa. And by this, I'd moved on. And I'd seen her. She just showed up at my house one day. And I was like, "Oh, hey, Karen, I wasn't expecting you." She was like, "Here's this bottle of wine. I thought about you. And when I saw you last week, the way you looked, I thought that this could cheer you up a little bit somehow." Because she's like, "I never thought that you could look like that." But it does start to weigh you down, like mentally, physically. So I even found myself at work, like, not it taking so much for me to do something that I really enjoyed, that I wanted to do, but something that would take me a day, taking days, because I just to find the will. And it was just, it was really becoming too much. And then the pandemic happened.
So, here you were on this journey. Like I said, you still just radiate enthusiasm for the early part of that journey when you joined the field. Was it the pandemic or something else that was the straw that broke the camel's back?
It was the e-commerce platform. Then the pandemic happened, and I took a break. I paused, right? I paused. We were all home. I started baking bread like everybody else, and
goes well with wine.
Goes well with wine. Started contemplating, like, maybe we should brew a beer in our back. It just, all the things, right? But at the same time, had really just started Black UX Austin, which is, we're aiming to get to nonprofit status, but we started it for, like, Black folks who did UX, and to provide a community that we could talk about the things we're going, that we could share resources, that we could, bring in speakers to talk to us about their journey and learn from that. And so I was spending more and more time sort of doing that, and sort of, hearing the stories of other experiences of other folks, but still creating this community to sort of to help and thrive, right? And sort of doing that, I met this woman who was working at Microsoft, and I was just, like, inspired by her, and she was still doing UX research. And I was like, you know what, maybe I'm not done yet, And so, a couple companies had reached out, and then Gusto reached out to me, and they, at first I was like, I don't know anything about, like, a platform, like, I don't know anything about healthcare. I don't know anything about, like, that's just not, my wheelhouse. So thank you, but no thank you. And then they just kept coming back. And then they started telling me about the work that they were doing to combat predatory payday lending by allowing hourly employees to borrow against their future paychecks with no fee and no interest. And I said, I was like, oh, okay, you're doing good in the world. You're doing the kind of work that makes me want to work at a company like this, right? And so I was like, that's what you should have started with, but let's talk, right? Now that I know this is the kind of work you're doing, and this is more aligning, because at this time I'd started to get more involved with my school. George Floyd had happened, and we were, really talking more about how do we create a more diverse and inclusive design world, but just world, period, right? And so now I was like, this seems to be the time when companies are thinking differently, wanting to, behave differently, and sort of, and to think about their products differently. And I was like, okay, this sounds like a place that, like, that I can have some impact. And so I said, hey, I'm going to go back and do this. I'm not done yet. I'm not done with UX. Let's, like, this sounds awesome. Like, I want to be a part of this. And also to come where, like, now people were actually talking. Like, I didn't have to, it wasn't like something secret, and I didn't have to sort of push people to talk about diversity and inclusion. But it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to actually do it. And so we were talking a lot about it, but again, I started to be like, what are we doing, like, in our design process? What are we doing? How are we incorporating it? Are we thinking and confronting our own privilege and our own biases before we even start to think about creating a product? are we having those discussions? Are we being upfront and honest about it? Because they play a role in the things that we create. And so I started to talk about, like, I was like, think about the products out there, right? Like, look at the research on self-driving cars that are more likely to hit people with darker skin tones. I was like, why is that? Because there was no one programming and feeding into, because it's AI. I was like, somebody feeds these images into there. They weren't feeding images of people of color because they weren't thinking about them, right? Again, it's about who has a seat at the table. I like to tell people about, it becomes very personal. I have very thick, long hair, got a lot of hair. I travel a lot. Every time I go through the scanner security machine, my hair sets it off every single time. Every single time. And initially, the first few times like that it was happening, I had to suffer the indignity of people putting their hands in as much as I was like, no, I'm manager, but I had a plane to catch. And they're like, you will not get on your plane if we can't check your hair. And so after that, I had to start adding an additional 45 minutes, even though I lived in Austin, which is a very small airport. And I had to start adding, and it's because also too, what I realized in Austin, this didn't happen to me in New York. It didn't happen to me in Boston. It didn't happen to me but in Austin it did. And I was like, are there not a lot of Black people with locks coming through Austin? Like this, it literally, and so it just something as simple as that. And the woman said to me, she was like, ma'am, it's the machine. And I was like, no. They put a man on the moon. You cannot tell me that we cannot create a machine that can scan my hair texture. No, that is not, it wasn't considered, right? Wasn't a consideration. Again, not thinking about something more universal, right? Thinking very narrow-minded about who's going to come through this machine, who's going to use it. Probably didn't test it on anybody who had, thick enough long hair. And so now so that I'm like, this is the world that we live in, but this is the world that we can change, right? When you're in these positions, this is the possibility and that's why I think about, and that's why I went back to went back to UX and Gus, because I was like, there needs to be more of us at the table, a part of the conversation, talking about these things. And the more, then hopefully our coworkers will then start to think about this, right? And that it'll become something that's just embedded in the design, in our thinking processes,
Well, I think this would be the perfect time for us to take a quick break, because what I want to do after the break is talk about what it might take to get you back. Everyone, you're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. We are going to take that quick break. See you in a moment. Hey, it's Lou, and I want to take this opportunity to tell you how excited I am, not about a conference this time, but actually about books. Yes, we still publish books. In fact, I think we're putting out 10 this year. Some of them just came out, hot off the press. Some of them are about to come out and are available at a discount. We've already published Change Makers, How Leaders Can Design Change in an Insanely Complex World this year. It's by Maria Giudice and Christopher Ireland. It is many of the nuggets of the greatest design leader minds that are out there in the industry right now about affecting change. Closing the Loop, Systems Thinking for Designers just came out like a week ago by Cheryl Kababa. Oh my goodness, is it selling? That is a book that really has hit on a note, because there's so many people in our field who need to step back or want to step back and look at things through the lens of systems thinking, as macro practically as you could get. Closing the Loop by Cheryl Kababa is available. Strategic Content Design, Tools and Research Techniques for Better UX by Erica Jorgensen is coming out in April. That is available from us on pre-order at 15% off. Another book that's getting a lot of sales, certainly, and a lot of interest, because content design is maturing. We need to test our content, and Erica's got you covered there. We've also got other books coming from people like Donna Leachaw, Kate Towsey, Dan Mall, Janae Kahn, Michael Greer, Jorge Arango, Aaron Weigel, and on and on. So it's going to be quite a year. Check them all out, rosenfeldmedia.com, or at some other places that sell books, like the one that starts with A. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. Lou Rosenfeld with Lisanne Norman, a woman of color who was excited to be in research, couldn't believe how wonderful it was. And as you heard before the break, after a while, felt the need to leave for a variety of reasons. But we need people like you back in the field. And I'm sure you're doing some enjoyable and really great stuff at the Hotchkiss School. Lisanne is teaching African American studies courses in addition to serving as the co-director of diversity, equity, and inclusion there. That's your high school. You're an alumna of that school, but we want you back. What might it take?
That's a great question. When I think about it, I think what it would take is to see a greater investment more consistently on the parts of tech companies into, recruiting and retaining, not just recruiting, but retention. We talk a lot about recruitment of, BIPOC folks and, various industries, but I don't think we talk enough about retaining. And I think what is required, some of these companies, is to think about the culture of their companies. Do you have a porous enough culture that you're thinking of people as culture adds and not culture fit, right? Are you truly creating an environment in which someone can, as people keep asking, show up as your authentic self, right?
So add versus fit is what you
Yes.
said. That's a really, really interesting, nuanced difference there.
Right.
How can we get to fit that supports retention?
I don't think we get to, because I think fit sounds too restrictive, right? I think that it's about it's about being able to create a culture that is, that's flexible enough that it can, like this person can come in and add to the culture,
Oh,
right? And
I'm sorry.
expand on it.
I think I interpreted it backwards. I was thinking that you want people to fit together rather than feeling like they are an add to something already there. I see now.
Yes, no, but it's more about expansion, but adding and expanding, right? To then be able to encompass and to be able to, so that people don't feel uncomfortable, that someone doesn't have to feel like a lot of times, like code switch. BIPOC people come in and they code switch, right? They have to be different, think different, talk different than they do when they're not at work, or when they're in when they're not in a PWR, when they're not in a predominantly white space. And it's time for us to, that even is sort of, that's now you're splitting who you are and sort of mellowing it out to be more, other folks to be able to consume who you are. And it's like, no, that it shouldn't be, right? And I think companies need to sort of, look at the culture of their company and be like, what are we doing? Are we saying that we want people to come in and assimilate, or are we saying we want people to show up and help us to expand who and what we are, right? And that's not easy because we haven't been operating like that, right? But I think one of the ways to start to do that, if you already have BIPOC folks at your company, ask them honestly, like, what's happening with you? Like, do you feel that you can show up and be your authentic self here? Do you feel that you're being heard? Do you feel like you're being encouraged or recognized? And I think that, and when I think about it too, it's not even just folks of color, but just even neurodivergent folks. They're people who learn differently. One of my things for myself, my own bias that I had to confront is when hiring, I was like, everyone has a college degree. And then I did this amazing South by show with a woman who, she'd never graduated from college, but she was rising up in the health tech field, and it was the experience that she'd gained. And I had to, sort of check myself to be like, oh, that's my own bias. How do I now start to think about when I'm hiring, looking at, people who don't have, or finding a way to encourage people who have the experience and the knowledge, but maybe don't necessarily have a degree, and then a degree from, a school that I know or that I'm familiar with. So I think it's all sort of, confronting the bias, thinking about, how do you make sure that your culture is one that is additive and not just, so tight and constrained that someone has to assimilate. I think those are two. There's some others that I'm going to have and talk about in my talk, to sort of some suggestions that very pointed ones that I have for companies, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, I
and
do have a
then,
question though.
yes.
Like, but I don't want. Yes, we don't want to give away all the great stuff you're going to cover at Advancing Research. However, um, I wonder if another thing to explore, and again, maybe it's in your talk, is helping companies or encouraging companies to learn from past models of successful adding, if they have
Mm.
them. Like, let's say, women becoming fully integrated into a company's workforce and culture. Is that a model you've seen useful to emulate? Or are there other models, or are those models just too different to really apply here?
No, I don't think that they're too different, right? I think there's definitely similarities, right? You're changing your company, your company culture to accommodate, or to sort of to be able to fully serve a different demographic, right? So I think they're like the Zambia, like, incorporating more women. I think there's things that we can definitely learn from that. But what we have to recognize is that, each group has their own specific challenges, right? And each group
Mm-hmm.
sort of come to the table with different things. So even with a lot of companies, I sort of push them to be like, you can't have the exact same strategy or think that, you're going to create the same policies or restructure to help, get more African Americans as you would Latinx, right? Like you have to think about the different issues that those populations face and the different backgrounds that they come from. You can't, it's not one size fit all. And so
Got it.
that requires a little bit more work, right? Like that's just the reality of it. But the benefits of it are so much greater. Like again, we all know the research. A company is just more productive and better when there is a diverse group of folks working there at the table making decisions. That's just, I'm like Harvard Business Review, all come on. Like these are facts. Now let's make it happen. Right. Like it's been interesting to see, there were all these calls, and I'm going to talk about in my talk, like in 2020, and all these pledges and folks are going to make and how this was going to change so much. And it's like, okay, let's see where we are,
Right.
right? A few years on, like have we really shifted and changed as much, given the amount of attention and pledges that were put forth? That's something for us to think about.
Well, I hope you'll be back. I know, certainly looking forward to learning more at your talk at Advancing Research later this month. But before we wrap up, I do have my request, as I do for all of our guests. Would you bring us? What's the gift?
So my gift is a company called POCIT, and it's People of Color in Tech. And they're just a wonderful platform, right? I just have to read their mission, because every time I read, I'm like, yes, their mission is to build a place for people of color to thrive in tech, to inspire them, help them enter, level up, and secure what they call the bag, which is just a great position in tech, and then a great way to build generational wealth. And they have a weekly newsletter that they talk about stories. They provide tips on how to get into tech, how to get into different careers in tech on their website. They also have a podcast where it's sort of this go-to for, they talk about tech, pop culture, and life. They also have, most significantly, a job platform where you can learn about jobs from all different types of companies, as well as companies can post jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they do ask that companies pay. Why? Because this is a platform, this is a service. They're helping you from both sides of it. And I think this is a way to sort of, again, just to build a networking for companies, and a way to, have a great outlet to find, if you're really looking and you really want to find great BIPOC employees for tech, this is a great platform for it. So I really encourage folks to check it out, to sign up for it, because they're doing great things to move our goal forward of having just a more diverse platform, particularly a more diverse workforce in tech industry.
That's great, and that it's a great place to post positions. I'm really glad you made that point. Again, the organization is POSIT, People of Color in Tech. We'll make sure that the link is in the show notes. Lisanne, this was great. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great conversation, really helpful, a lot of practical advice, and I know there's going to be a lot more when you give your talk at Advancing Research. Again, thank you, Lisanne Norman, the co-director of DEI at the Hotchkiss School, and former and hopefully future, once in future UX research leader. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Lou. This was great. I had a great time and can't wait to talk to you all more during the conference.
Thanks for listening to the Rosenfeld Review, brought to you by Rosenfeld Media. If you like our show, please subscribe and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. I'd love it if you tell a friend to have a listen, and check out our website for over 100 podcasts with other interesting people. You'll find them all at rosenfeldreview.com.